Hello, everyone. On behalf of Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage and INTAC and the INTAC Conservation Institutes, I extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Alberto Campagnolo, and everyone who has joined us for today's talk in the Conservation Insights 2020 lecture series. I'm Dr. Padma Roila, Director ICI Delhi. Now to introduce our speaker, Alberto Campagnolo trained as a book conservator at the European Course for Conservators and Restorers of Book Materials from 1998 to 2001 in Spoleto, Italy, and has worked in that capacity in various institutions, amongst which the National Museum Wales, London Metropolitan Archives, St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt, and the Vatican Library prominent. He studied conservation of library and archival materials from 2001 to 2006 at Ca' Foscari University, Venice, Italy, and then went on for an MA in Digital Culture and Technology from 2007 to 2009 at King's College, London. He pursued a PhD, which he finished in 2015, on an automated visualization of historical book binding structures at the Legatus Research Center, University of the Arts, London. He is an adjunct professor at Digital Humanities at the University of Udine, Italy, since 2018. Alberto has been collaborating since 2013 with Dodd Porter, Schoenberg Institute of Manuscript Studies, University of Pennsylvania, on VisCol, a modeling and visualization tool for the gathering structure of books in codex format. Since 2018, he has been an active member of the IADA board. He has been part of the editorial board of the Journal of Paper Conservation since 2016 and is now co-editor-in-chief with Aurelie Martin. The title of today's talk is Digitizing the Materiality of Books. The successful transmediation of books and documents through digitization requires the synergetic partnership of many professional figures that have had what may sometimes appear as conflicting goals at heart. On one side, there are those who look after the physical objects and strive to preserve them for the future generations, that is, the conservators and curators. And on the other, those involved with the digitization of the objects, the information that they contain, and the management of the digital data. Digitization professionals, and then digital humanists. These complementary activities are generally considered as separate. More often than not, conservation is presented as ancillary to digitization, with the role of the conservator restricted to the preparation of items for scanning with no input into the digital product. By understanding the informational content of books as objects and the role that conservators could have in the creation of broader digital products and tools on the one hand, and on the other, the transformative and transcendent value that digital surrogates can should bring to the table, we can aim at producing digital products that balance the importance of the original object, while also keeping in mind the merit and enhancing nature of digital surrogates. So before I invite Albert to start with the talk, may I please request all of you to mute your microphones. We'll be taking the questions right at the end of the talk. Please do type those in the chat box. We'll take them at the end. And also type in your name, email ID, and organization name. We'd love to know who all have joined us. So over to you, Alberto, now.
Okay, let me know if you've seen it.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Padma, for inviting me to give this talk. As you see, I kind of revised a little bit the title, and we'll see why I put the plural. So the title now is Digitizing the Materialities of Books, and we'll look into the potential role of the conservator. I have to put potential because more often than not, the conservator is not really involved into giving any information about the object that is being digitized, but only to preserve it and to make it possible for it to be scanned. So we'll see the importance of the data that conservators can and usually do gather, and the way in which this information could be transferred into the digital. Usually when I present, I put this big slide that put together into one big picture my kind of unusual career. As Padma said earlier, I started off as a book conservator. So I started book conservation in Spoleto, in the European course for book conservation. And then I did a book conservation MA, a BA at Ca' Foscari University in Venice. Everything that you see in blue here is color-coded to be mainly conservation work, and everything red is my new trend, my new part of the second part of my career, which is in digital humanities. So while I was working as a book conservator, I started a master in digital culture and technology at King's College London. And then I put the things together with a PhD at the Legato Research Center at the University of the Arts London. And from then on, I've been working more and more about the ways in which we can transfer into the digital all there is to say about the book as an object. So looking at the content, yes, but also everything else that comes on top of it, which is normally ignored into the digital. And we see in this talk how small steps we've been doing towards this goal. So we look at book as an object that conservators understand very well. Then we'll see what's the usual involvement with conservation, with the digitalization. And then we look into the ways in which we can digitize the book as an object and to go beyond standard digitization. So books as objects. The book, of course, I'm referring to mostly to the book as in codex format for this talk, but any book object is a complex object which develops in three-dimensional and has a working structure that makes it possible for us to access the content. And all these things that come together allows us to use the objects to get into the book and read the pages and look at the content. But all there is around it is equally important because it tells us something about the culture that produced that document. So we can regard books as examples of material culture. It's because they are complex entities, and on top of what they have inside, which is the purpose that they were made together, put together, they also are examples of technological and material data that come from another time, another place. We can look at objects in three main ways, we could say. One is for the content, of course. One is to try to see how the book was used. So the book as an object of use. And also there is a big part that comes into the study of the object, which is its technology as an artifact. So how it works and all the materials that come to it. However, usually books are only seen as containers. So what people are really interested in, especially in digitization, is to look at the content of the book without really paying too much attention at all the other details that are inside the book as an object. So when we come to digitization, we see a lot of efforts about the digitization of the content through, of course, digital scanning, so imaging, and we can read books that are in a library at the other side of the world. And there is a lot of effort about the encoding of the text and of the material. And the text encoding initiative in the TEI is one big example of a de facto standard being used over and over for the digitization of the content of books. There is a bit about the use of an object, and the Turning the Pages of the British Library was a good example of how we could model a little bit how the objects, the original objects would work into the digital. So in the 3D version of the Turning the Pages, you could turn the page of the manuscript that was digitized, and the model behind it had an understanding of the differences between paper and parchment, so the way in which the object would react to the hands if it were made of paper or parchment are modeled into the digital object, and you can start to understand a little bit about the book as an object. However, when it comes to actually understanding the technology and the materiality of it, we are really, really lacking a lot of information that's not transposed into the digital. And I put there a little black box because what happens is that really books as object are treated as black boxes. So all that there is about the technological data, the material data is considered as one big singularity. The black box concept comes from the information science and actor network theories, and is defined as a technological artifact that, while appearing obvious to the ordinary observer, can also be regarded as a complex entity, the essence of which depends on the diverse system of techniques, materials, processes, and actions, which looks like it could really easily applied to the book. The book is a complex entity, and to the normal user, the book as an object is just a way to get to the content, but there is a lot more information about that we should be able to digitize. So what normally happens when we digitize a book? We put the book under the scanner, under the camera, and we take pictures of each side of each page. And what we end up with is these sequences of images. Now, it's true that more and more we are getting images also of the blank pages, or the end leaves of the book, and also the binding, at least the cover, the front and the back of the book, and also the edges. So there is some information that's captured through this, but really what you end up with is these sequences of images that capture the content, but hardly ever gives that information about the book that came with this content. One important thing to remember is that, at least looking at the book in codex format, is that it's a complex thing that can be defined as a collection of sheets of any material, folded double and fastened together at the spine, usually protected by covers. So there is a lot more beyond just the covers that are digitized, and the essence of the book in codex format is actually the gathering. So the ways in which the pages are connected together by folding the piece of paper or parchment and putting it together into groups of leaves that can be then bound together is the ultimate working unit of the codex. So if we don't understand this little piece of information, everything else that comes after it would be really difficult to understand. And this is normally lacking in digitization, because what we end up with by taking pictures of the sides is we end up with what I normally refer to as floating pages. There is no understanding of no information about how the pages were connected, and they are physically connected into conjoint leaves that are folded and put together into groups. So you might get some information about the gatherings. You can get some information about how the lists were put together if you have information like collation formulas, but normally actually all you have is this collection of floating pages, which are not transferring to digital, the very essence of the book as an object in codex format. So let's see what happens normally with conservation and digitization. What's their report? If you do a little Google search about book conservators, you get a lot of images that shows us the kind of activity that the conservators do. And you see that they have a very intimate relationship with the book. We take them apart, we get into the little bits of it. We really have to understand how they work in order to be able to preserve them. And in order to really get into the object, understand it, and in order also not to destroy it in the process, we need to really understand it. We normally record information about it, and we have a lot of information that is stuck into our condition reports of conservation databases, which are not normally linked to anything else. So they're there for us. You might get some papers out of very interesting structures, but for the majority of things that we record, they just stay there and that's it. When it comes to digitization, if you look at the ways in which the conservators are involved, we see that they tend to be involved only in the preparation of the objects for digitization. So you get some more and more, of course, the conservators are involved in more activities that we see, but the main things happen is that the conservators is able to choose the material sometimes to say, okay, this really is not fit for digitization. or it can be prepared and then the work happens on the object to be prepared for digitization, which normally comes under the nickname of DigiPrep. And this, these are just two examples of documents or publications that shows us this tendency. In the Listen book that I put together, we see that more and more in recent projects, the conservatory is actually more and more involved into the full ecosystem of actions that happen around the digitization of the book. So from the project planning, the budgeting phase, down to what happens before digitization, during and after, and also a little bit in outreach and research, with this great majority of actions still, of course, focused on the preservation of the objects, the giving access to the digitization for the object, and also in the selection of the material. Whilst there is a little bit more increased interest in to give the conservators a voice also in outreach and research, we see that this doesn't happen all the time. In fact, it's very few projects actually do include this. And most importantly, again, the information that is collected by the conservators during their assessments and during their conservation research and projects, the information is not given to the catalogs, it's not linked to anything else. So the information the conservator has about the object is not really considered interesting and it's left aside, whereas there is a lot of information that is there and is collected and is not really used. So we'll see whether we can get to this information. Of course, conservators are not always good. In fact, Blades, in his famous book about the animals of the book, does put down bookbinders and amongst the animals of the book. And of course, bookbinders back then were what we can consider today book conservators. And he also talks about collectors and servants and children. He has examples of children and books, and he say don't have children touch any books, they really ruin them, they're really bad people. So don't have the children near to your precious books. Jokes aside, it is true that if the conservators don't understand the object that they are conserving, they can destroy evidence. This is a sad example from the Nag Hammadi codices from the 4th century AD. These are amongst the first structures of books in codex formats that we have, and they were conserved before they could be properly studied. And it ends up with that we do not have all the information about their structure as it were when they were dug out of the dig in Egypt. That was because during conservation, work was done that canceled some of the evidence and no records were made or no records are accessible to us about the structure as they were found. So conservation can also be bad if no information is collected or no information is actually given to whoever comes after. Are we really digitizing the book as an object? What will happen if we were to lose our libraries and consider what we are digitized? Are we really getting information that is saved in this manner? There was an interesting conference a few years back about exactly this. What do we lose when we lose a library? It was done in the University of Leuven in Belgium, where they did lose a library, I believe 3 times over the last couple of centuries. So they know something about it, what you lose, and they are really engaged into digitization. The thing is that we do digitize now, and so some information will be preserved, but not a lot of it, especially not a lot about the objects. And it does happen that we do have libraries that are destroyed. There is even a Wikipedia page about the list of destroyed libraries, and the last one that was added It was the said fire at the National Museum of Brazil in 2018, and the library inside the museum was destroyed. When that happened, Wired magazine commented that, you know, it was a stupid thing that all the material was destroyed because all those artifacts and books could have been systematically backed up over the years with photographs and scan, as if by taking photographs and scanning, we could really preserve these artifacts. Now, one thing you should be clear is that digitization does not equal to preservation. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we could get better information out there in case we were to lose the object. It doesn't mean that the object will be preserved, unfortunately, but at least some more information will be preserved. Another thing to remember is that photographs and scan only get us to a certain point, because digitization can happen in different ways, and to digitize is also not to replicate an artifact in all of its nature, and we'll see this a little bit in a while. So when it comes to digitization, a lot of effort is into the digitization of the content of the book, of course. Some effort has been done into the object of use, and very little baby steps have been made to also bring into the digital information about the technology and materiality of the object. And here I highlighted the word physicality. We need to define a little bit these two concepts of physicality and materiality. They are often used as synonyms, but really they identify two different things. By the physicality of an object, we can define it as the infinite set of physical attributes that make up the reality of the objects. And important to remember here is infinite set. So the book, the artifact in all of its entirety is its physicality. With materiality instead, we define an emergent property. That is a property that depends on the attention of some observer, and it is up to this observer to isolate as meaningful some particular attributes. And these are set aside from the continuum of physicality. So everything about the object is its physicality, but when we go in and study something, we can really extract some information about its materiality. And that's why in the title I put materiality, is because really it's as an infinite set of information as if it would be it's the physicality of the object. So every time we pay our attention to some aspect of materialities, we are really getting into one materiality, and we get more and more information, and more materialities we want to study. So how do we get all of this information in digitization? And of course, I'm gonna talk about just a few examples, because as I said, we're just doing baby steps. The first things are happening now. And more and more ways to gather this information we'll probably see in the future. So, but more and more we get information, the better our digital surrogates will be. So what we normally mean by digitization? As we've seen, usually when we think about digitization of books, we think about capturing the content of the page through photographs and then storing these images. We are going to instead expand this concept, and we want to indicate digitization as any action directed at the computerization, so the ways in which we can use this data in the computer, and the transmediation of books and their feature, materiality included, into the digital, and also the use of such data. So a first step to digitize the book, and even a book as an object, is still linked to the first steps of using photography and imaging. Through cameras and scanners, we can capture and represent and also reproduce forms and features of an object through visual means. If we want to take a step further from just simple images, we can look into multispectral imaging. Now, multispectral imaging is usually associated with the study of palimpsests. So a way for us to read manuscript that have been scraped off and written over, and because of the ways in which the ink stays into the parchment, we can use advanced imaging to get into it and read the text that was deleted. However, multispectral imaging is not just for palimpsests. Now, how does multispectral imaging work in a nutshell? We have our object under the camera, and we illuminate the object with narrowband lighting through sequences of wavelengths. And we take a picture of each of these wavelengths. This is a video that shows that one page illuminated under different wavelengths. As you see, the color changes, and as the color change, we have some information that is more apparent than others. So if we take this picture and we look into the different images that have been taken under each different wavelengths, we see that what we see changes a little bit, and at each wavelength, materials react differently. And we can use the way in which different materials react differently to different wavelengths to study the materials behind it. So by looking at, so what we end up with is this, is called a cube of images, because they're all registered one after the other, and they develop in 3D, as in we can think about going from one page to the other and looking at how the same pixel, it's different in all different wavelengths. So that's going through the Z axis. And we can really use this Z axis. We can, for example, try to understand how these different materials react by plotting their reaction to each different wavelengths on a graph. This is an example from that page. And if we take the reaction of each different material to the different wavelengths and plot these reactions on a graph, we can see how these end up with different spectral curves. And in this, you have 4 different spectral curves. One is the red one is for the paper. Then you have 2 stains that have different curves, and the ink has a completely different curve as well. So by comparing these spectral curves, we can try to gain information about the material behind it. Sorry. In this particular example, this stain was particularly interesting because by chance, we were actually able to understand what stain it was without going into any extra step of analysis. So just through this, multispectral imaging, we're able to understand what happened here. So this stain was actually a stain that was done by a sloppy scribe at the time of the writing of this manuscript. How do we know that? Is that because the stain here in the middle has actually 2 components, one darker one, which is highlighted in green here, and a paler halo around it, which is highlighted in light blue. By comparing the spectral curves of these 2 components of the stain to other materials which we found on the same page, we could see that actually the 2 stains, the 2 components of the stain were actually one done with the same ink of the writing of the manuscript, and the other one was done with the ink that was used to rule the manuscript. So you can see very faded lines under each line of text, which were done before the copies wrote the text. And the copies was really sloppy and spilled both inks on the page. And by comparing the spectral curves, we were able to actually understand what happened here. Now, not everything can be understood in this manner through spectral curves, not if we don't have a very good reference library of spectral curves. These are happening. There is a project at the Library of Congress in Washington, whereby they are reconstructing the spectral curves of the different pigments and inks that you find in manuscripts. So you could tell one red from another by looking at the spectral curves, by comparing whatever you have on your manuscript to the library of curves that the Library of Congress is building. But if you don't get enough information with that, you need to go into different kind of imaging techniques, so still non-destructive analysis technique like XRF, FTR, FORS that allow you to really get into the chemical and the chemistry of the materials that you have on your page. But multispectral imaging is very good in a manner because it allows you to see like a map of the different materials that you get on your page. So it's good as a first step to get into the understanding of the materiality of what you have in front of you. Another imaging technique that's been used for quite some time on books is X-ray photography, which is used usually to understand the lacing of the balls of the book. And this is just one example. An advancement of this is the use of micro CT scans, which can get us even more a higher resolution of information about the three-dimensionality of the object. And this is an example from the St. Catherine's Gospel, preserved at the British Library now. It's the most ancient example of a binding that we have in Europe. And it wasn't understood exactly how the decoration of its cover was done. Because being such a pressure item, we couldn't just go inside and tweak around to see what was inside. Different theories have been done over the years. And now with CT scan, everything was confirmed. So the decoration was done in a certain manner with a cord and some layering of gesso to end up with the decoration that we have. But only through CT scan we could get to this information. All of this that we've seen so far is what I would call direct acquisition digitization. That is, we can point a camera, we can point a scanner, we can point a sensor to the object and get some feedback back that allows you to understand something about the object. How can we go beyond this? Because not everything can be captured through this manner. There are some features which I call untransferable features that cannot be digitized through direct acquisition. So not everything can be acquired through just by pointing something at the object and getting some data back. And these are some examples of these untransferable features. One interesting thing is that if we look at the way in which these have been sometimes transferred is through metadata, so description, which means that for some of these features, what we really need is to have some models that allows us to describe that particular feature or that particular object, and descriptive metadata that allows you to really give information about it. As an example, we'll look at the gathering structures. As we've seen, the gathering structures are really the working unit of the codex. Without that, we would not have a codex. But normally when things are digitized, we end up this, as I call the floating pages problem. All these pages are connected somehow in the original object. They form one quire, but we don't have any information about how this happened. Another problem that we have, at least with manuscript studies, is that collation formulas, so the ways in which scholars usually tend to describe how these gatherings and conjoined pages are structured within the book, there's not a standard way of doing it. And all of these different collation formulas that you see on the screen are actually actual collation formulas from the literature, done according to different standards, different methods. And they all record the same kind of information, some more, some less, but the basic information is all there. It's just that it's done in such a compact way that if you don't understand what you're looking at, it's really hard to really understand it. And also, it's even if you know it very well, it's so compact, the information, that it's really hard for you to picture in your mind. So they're useful, but once they're there, people tend to regard them as like gospel, and someone has done the job, it's gotta be right. And also they don't allow you to input any kind of uncertainty. And sometimes, even if you can take the book apart, sometimes it's actually difficult to understand how pages were put together and how the gathering was structured. So having possibility to also add some uncertainty will be actually quite important. One project that is trying to tackle this is VSCOL, which is led by Dot Porter at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. And I've been collaborating with Dot since 2013 when I was doing my PhD. So what does VSCOL do is, we will call it as an ecosystem of data gathering, whereby you have a modular which allows the user to record information about the structure of the gatherings of the choirs. And all the information behind it is recorded in XML, which means that the model behind it is XML, extensible markup language. But as a conservator, you don't need to understand or know anything about it. I'm going to show you XML in a little bit, but don't be scared. You don't have to actually look at it. You don't have to touch it. The model behind it is right now, it's just a form on the web page, on the browser. We are working towards VSCOL 2.0, which is going to bring in even more information that we can gather, even more. We can model very complex structures that we'll see. And the interface is a very clever interface that was put together first by the University of Toronto. We are working on it, and you can actually move things around in a graphical environment. But what happens is that once you have your XML, you can actually end up with collation formulas if you wanted to. But the most important thing is that this information is also visualized for you in order for you to understand it better. So you have gathering diagrams and other kind of visualizations, and you can add information on the structure as you go along. So as a conservator, you could add information about the status condition statement of one page, or some features that you want to record. As I said, this is the XML behind it. You don't need to worry about this. It's just the way in which we can record the information in a way that we can transform it to something else. One of the things we can transform it to, as I said, is the gathering diagrams. And these are automated diagrams. So I wrote a script that, reading that XML that we seen earlier, takes information and transforms it into a drawing that we can understand better. And these are two choirs from an actual manuscript at the Marciano National Library in Venice. This manuscript was conserved a couple of times, which explains some of the peculiarities of the structure, but not all of them. So the first choir here on the left, there is one sewing, next sewing that was put in place by the conservation treatment, but the structure of the choir in that manner was actually, looks like it was original. So there are some information there from the original structure that was put together in the Byzantine period. This is another example from the Vatican Library, again, a very complex manuscript. And another thing that VSCOL allows you to do that collation formulas don't usually, actually don't, is allows you to also signal and then visualize the attachment methods. So here you have, of course, the sewing of the book. Also, you have different ways in which the pages were pasted together to create this complex manuscript. And as I said, these are automated diagrams. So once you have your data in XML, you just click run and the script generates these for you. Another way in which VSCOL puts into digital this connection of the pages is that it finally allows you to solve the floating pages problem. And you can take a book that was digitized, and with VSCOL you model its structure, and then you can rejoin together the images of the pages that were actually conjoined, so they're actually physically attached in order for the manuscript to work as a codex. Now, interestingly enough, these can also be applicable, of course, to fragmentary manuscripts. So in this particular case, this is the Galen-Syriac palimpsest. The big bulk of the palimpsest is in America, in a private collection just outside of DC. But there are leaves scattered around the world. Some are still in St. Catherine in Egypt, and some are at the Vatican Library. And in this particular case, so these conjoined pages are nowadays an ocean apart, but they used to be together. And with this code, we can rejoin them together, at least digitally. And this is the web page of the project. As I said, we are working towards VSCOL 2.0. So if you're interested, there is more information that's going to be published here in the next couple of months. Of course, the gathering structure is just one small step towards the working codex. There is a lot more information there that should be recorded. And the Ligatus Research Center at University of London, whilst during its survey of the books on St. Catherine Monastery in Egypt, developed an XML schema again to describe the structure of the books. This schema can be still found on the Ligatus website, and this is the link to it. To be able to describe something is one step. It's also important to have a vocabulary to describe it. So another project that Ligatus did was the development of the language of bindings thesaurus, which allows us to give precise concept to the different things that we need to see and record on books as objects. And most importantly, this thesaurus was done in such a way that each different concept gets its own URI. It's like a web address, which is unique to the concept, which means that we can then use it to describe things with this new technology that is being applied more and more for cultural heritage, which is the linked data. And the ecosystem that's used natively for the language of bindings is the CDOC CRM, which is an ontology that allows us to describe things and in cultural heritage. I won't go into detail. It's just a new way to describe things beyond databases that allows us to link different silos of information. Interestingly enough, the latest project by Ligatus is the link conservation data. So building on the experience of the St. Catherine Monastery survey and then of the thesaurus of the language of bindings, Ligatus is now moved to ways in which we can finally model and export conservation data so that it's linkable to other resources online, catalogs or not. And the link conservation data went through the first phase. Now we are working towards the end of the second phase. We're actually modeling data. And in the third phase, we will be able to give information about how people can actually use these methods. So again, if you're interested, the website is there and it's been updated continuously. And what this does is that allows us to finally get some information out of the data that's recorded by conservators. So what normally happens is that we have a lot of information that is recorded by conservators about the materiality, which is normally on a silo on its own, which is not really tackled by anything else, anyone else. And then, of course, we have a lot of information about the books that we can find online or in journals, about everything else about it. What is important is that all of this information can be actually linked together and we can get information out of it for all different aspects. As we said, not everything will be recorded because of the materialities and the physicality still staying with the object, but it would be a further step towards the digitalization of the book as an object. If we were to do that, and we are starting to do that, we can really build these very good digital culture objects that represent the original book, but they don't replace it. Of course, I'm still a conservator. The object and with its physicality is still what contains all of the knowledge that we need to preserve. Through this digitization of its materialities, we can get more and more information out of it. Sometimes it's actually easier to see something on the computer screen as it was to actually look at a book. But this means that we actually, by getting more information, getting more ways into which we can look at it, we actually getting other and new and novel research questions that we want to answer, which brings us back to the original because of its physicality and the infinite set of information that we get out of it, creating this infinite loop that goes from the original item to the digital culture object that represents it. So my advice to anyone involved in digitization is that to use your conservators. They have a lot of knowledge that is not normally tapped, and these should actually get into the digital more and more. And one last thing is that we mentioned that within the enemies of the book that the children were really bad for them. That's not true. Let your children play with the books, because we will need in the future more and more people who are actually engaged with the physicality of the book in order to get that information into the digital as we progress more and more into the digital. Now a little bit of advertisement. All the information that we talk today is actually contained in a book that I put together. What I do in the book, I kind of bring together these information that we share today in a kind of framework. But the juicy part of the book is actually from case studies from conservators who are actually working and they present their work in digitization. So how they are dealt with digitization. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. I think it was a very interesting talk, and we do have few questions. So with your permission, if you want to just pick up those questions.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing here.
Yeah.
And let's look at the questions.
Yeah. The first one is, while using X-rays, CT scans, what is the appropriate strength of X-rays how is the appropriate strength of X-rays to be used determined? And can the use of high intensity of X-rays damage paper objects or damage these objects? Paper objects, basically.
It depends on what you're looking at. There's not one answer that is good for everything. One example is the use of the synchrotron to get information of the forged pages of the Archimedes palimpsest. So the Archimedes palimpsest was the first manuscript in which multispectral imaging was actually applied to. And in order to get information out of it, multispectral imaging was able to recover the underwriting for 19% of the pages, but there were some pages that had been forged in the 19th century with overpaint of some full page miniatures. In order to get under that, they had to use a synchrotron. So they put the page under a very powerful beam of the synchrotron, and line by line, they reconstructed the underwriting. Even this doesn't really do a lot of damage to the parchment. Light and all the electromagnetic energy is cumulative, so you don't want to do this more and more. So it's best to do it once with the best technology you have at your head, and get out the information so that in the future you won't have to do it again. So there's no one answer. It's just, do as much as you can, and materials won't be too affected for just once doing it once.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, when we saw that schematic diagram, there were some horizontal lines in the gathering diagrams that you showed of the Vatican book. So if you could just explain the lines, the different lines that were visible in that particular image.
Yeah, maybe I share a screen again to show it. Yeah.
The one which had one horizontal line, there were like little vertical lines as well. So
yeah, let me just go back to it. This one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
can you explain this gathering diagram for everyone?
Yeah. So what you see here is like these. Can I show? Let's see. No. When I have the pointer option, here it is. Here it is. Okay. So these lines here are the sewing through the fold. So the normal sewing structure that puts together the codex. Then these shaded lines here are the pasting of the pages together. So in this case, you have a hook that was pasted here. Here, the full page was pasted to the other one. And in this case here, the page was drummed. So only the edges of the page was actually pasted. So adhesive was applied only to the edges of it. And this is sewing again. And this here that you see like not crisp as it here is that some information is not clear, and this is how we signal uncertainty in our data.
Okay.
All the other lines are the actual pages.
Thank you.
No problem.
Now, what care should be taken for digitizing acetic or sticky papers as well as papers with iron rot? Should they be digitized, or because should they be digitized less they are damaged more?
That's always a tricky question. One answer is that if they can be digitized, it's probably best to risk little damage so that they can be at least captured as they are today, if we know that they're going to become less and less available in the future. At least you get that information out of it. Of course, you need to be able to at least select the ways in which this is digitized. So definitely you don't want to use any flat scanner, or you don't want to have, you have three main ways in which books are digitized. One is the flat scanner, in which you press the book down, like the one you have at home. Then you have another one where the scanner is overhead. But normally what happens is that you have a glass pane that is put on top of it in order to flatten the page. You don't want to do that with fragile materials, both fragile for the materials, but also for the binding. If you really can't really open the book as much and it's fragile, it's best to use a ledger that allows you to only open the book as much, and then have cameras to take pictures of each different side. And, with a conservator present, you can actually digitize quite fragile material there, page by page. It takes more time, but it's best to do it if you can.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Considering that the use of high-end techniques may not always be possible, are there any manual ways to capture and store more material information from books? Can one manually make these diagrams, the gathering diagrams that you showed, can those be done manually to just record and keep a record of the more information from the book and record it?
Yeah, for sure. The VSCOL is actually available online for everyone, so it's not a problem of not having access to it. You can still recall it on by hand and then go into the tool and have it there. So what's the difference between having the diagrams done by hand and done by the system is that once they're done by hand, you can apply, can use the image of it, but that's it. Whereas once the data is in XML, you can transform it to other things. So the diagrams are just one way to transform the data. You can actually transform into correlation formulas if you wanted to, or any other kind of visualization that you want to. So having the data in XML is good because then you can transform it to other things. When it comes to multispectral imaging, that is not available to everyone. It's true. It's becoming more and more affordable, and more libraries are building consortia so they actually can share the technology. But you can actually do a very quick and rough spectral curve just by normal photography, dividing the red, green, and blue channels. It won't give you a lot of information, but you can still start to get information out of it a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. The next question is from my side. Where would you absolutely not recommend digitization of an object? Cases where you feel it's a complete no-no to digitize a thing, a book. Are there any cases of you think a digitization is possible for every book or object possible?
So there is always a problem that it depends how much time you have and how much money you have. The good thing is that not everything needs to be digitized at the same time. We are building these ecosystems whereby you can add more information as you go along. So if you don't have the time and money to do a full digitization of the very fragile book right now, you don't have time to conserve it, you don't have time to spend with the conservator there page by page to do it, maybe postpone the imaging of it, but you can start digitizing by the other means. So adding more and more metadata that you can record without having to really destroy.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage and INTAC and the INTAC Conservation Institutes, I extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Alberto Campagnolo, and everyone who has joined us for today's talk in the Conservation Insights 2020 lecture series. I'm Dr. Padma Rohila, Director, ICI Delhi. Now to introduce our speaker, Alberto Campagnolo trained as a book conservator at the European Course for Conservators and Restorers of Book Materials from 1998 to 2001 in Spoleto, Italy, and has worked in that capacity in various institutions, amongst which the National Museum Wales, London Metropolitan Archives, St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt, and the Vatican Library prominent. He studied conservation of library and archival materials from 2001 to 2006 at Ca' Foscari University, Venice, Italy, and then went on for an MA in Digital Culture and Technology from 2007 to 2009 at King's College, London. He pursued a PhD, which he finished in 2015, on an automated visualization of historical book binding structures at the Legatus Research Centre, University of the Arts, London. He's an adjunct professor at Digital Humanities at the University of Udine, Italy, since 2018. Alberto has been collaborating since 2013 with Dot Porter, Schoenberg Institute of Manuscript Studies, University of Pennsylvania, on VisCol, a modeling and visualization tool for the gathering structure of books in codex format. Since 2018, he has been an active member of the IADA board. He has been part of the editorial board of the Journal of Paper Conservation since 2016 and is now co-editor-in-chief with Aurélie Martin. The title of today's talk is digitizing the materiality of books. The successful transmediation of books and documents through digitization requires the synergetic partnership of many professional figures that have had what may sometimes appear as conflicting goals at heart. On one side, there are those who look after the physical objects and strive to preserve them for the future generations, that is, the conservators and curators. And on the other, those involved with the digitization of the objects, the information that they contain, and the management of the digital data. Digitization professionals, and then digital humanists. These complementary activities are generally considered as separate. More often than not, conservation is presented as ancillary to digitization, with the role of the conservator restricted to the preparation of items for scanning with no input into the digital product. By understanding the informational content of books as objects and the role that conservators could have in the creation of broader digital products and tools on the one hand, and on the other, the transformative and transcendent value that digital surrogates can should bring to the table, we can aim at producing digital products that balance the importance of the original object, while also keeping in mind the merit and enhancing nature of digital surrogates. So before I invite Albert to start with the talk, may I please request all of you to mute your microphones. We'll be taking the questions right at the end of the talk. Please do type those in the chat box. We'll take them at the end. And also type in your name, email ID, and organization name. We'd love to know who all have joined us. So over to you, Alberto, now.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Let me share my screen. I'm getting the disabled sharing at the...
I've just given the permission. Sorry, Alberto. Try
okay. Yeah, now I can do it. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. Okay. Let me know if you're seeing it.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Pema, for inviting me to give this talk. As you see, I kind of revised a little bit the title, and we'll see why I put the plural. So the title now is Digitizing the Materialities of Books. And we'll look into the potential role of the conservator. I have to put potential because more often than not, the conservator is not really involved into giving any information about the object that is being digitized, but only to preserve it and to make it possible for it to be scanned. So we'll see the importance of the data that conservators can and usually do gather, and the way in which this information could be transferred into the digital. Usually when I present, I put this big slide that put together into one big picture my kind of unusual career. As Padma said earlier, I started off as a book conservator. So I started book conservation in Spoleto, in the European course for book conservation. And then I did a book conservation MA, a BA at Ca' Foscari University in Venice. Everything that you see in blue here is color-coded to be mainly conservation work, and everything red is my new trend, my new part of the second part of my career, which is in digital humanities. So while I was working as a book conservator, I started